I was the first child born into the Maddox empire, first to walk the halls of our glass towers, first to be handed a miniature briefcase at age 6 like it was a rite of passage, first to be told, one day, all this will be yours. I believed them. I believed my father when he said I had the mind of a CEO. I believed the board when they smiled at my presentations. And I believed the lie that family meant loyalty. It wasn't until the day they handed me my walking papers that I realized I had never been part of the plan. I still remember the room, mahogany table, chilled water bottles, label facing out, 12 chairs, 11 occupied. The 12th was mine. I walked in wearing the navy suit my mother once called too cold for a woman. My heels echoed like gunshots. No one met my eye. My father, Thomas Maddox, sat at the head. Silver hair, tailored suit, legacy bleeding from every pore. Evan sat to his right, my half-brother, younger, sloppier, but with the one trait I never had: blind obedience. He smirked as I sat, like he already knew. "Olivia," my father began, "we're restructuring." That word restructuring was the corporate equivalent of a bullet with your name on it. "You've been an incredible asset to Maddox Corp," he continued, reading from a script like I was a stranger. "But the board feels it's time for new direction." A folder slid across the table. Termination agreement, voluntary exit, no severance, no equity, just a line at the end. "We wish you all the best." I didn't blink. Instead, I looked each of them in the eye, starting with the board members who used to applaud my strategy decks. Then Evan, still smirking, like the devil finally got his deal signed. Then my father. He looked relieved, not guilty, not regretful, just tired. As if cutting me off was the only way to protect his favorite son's fragile ego. "I see," I said, "that's all. No shouting, no crying, no asking why." I stood, tucked the folder into my briefcase, and walked out without looking back. As the elevator doors closed, I allowed myself one breath, shaky, quiet, but not broken. They wanted me silent, so I gave them silence. The press release came the next morning. Olivia Maddox steps down to pursue new opportunities. They painted it like a sabbatical, a graceful exit. Even sent flowers to my condo with a handwritten note. "You'll always be part of this family." I didn't read past that line. I shredded the card and burned the rest, because they didn't fire me for performance. They fired me because I knew things. I knew Evan's offshore accounts. I knew the consulting fees wired to shell companies in the Caymans. I knew the board was laundering money through a fake subsidiary in Nevada. And I, the daughter with the MBA, the ethics, the spine, was inconvenient. I disappeared for a while, let the tabloids speculate. Olivia Maddox, seen in Paris. Olivia linked to tech startup rumors. I let them guess. In truth, I spent those months in a cramped apartment above a ramen shop in Singapore, learning, studying, watching how capital moves in the shadows. I took meetings with hedge funds and shadow investors. I sat across from men who didn't care about last names, only numbers. And every night, as I fell asleep to the sound of neon and motorbikes, I whispered to myself, "They think they buried me." But I was just planting myself. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal, it was the silence that followed. My father didn't call. Evan posted a celebratory selfie in the CEO office 2 weeks later. The board moved on as if I'd never existed. It was like being erased, like I'd never mattered. But that's the thing about being erased, it gives you a blank page. And I planned to write my name all over theirs. 3 months after I left Maddox Corp, I registered a company under a shell entity in Delaware, name OMX Corp, mission disrupt logistics, quietly, relentlessly, funding private capital from people who owed me favors. I wasn't building a company, I was building an empire, one that didn't need a family name to survive. I didn't need revenge, not yet. I just needed to prove to myself that I was never the weak link, that I didn't need their approval, their board seats, their bloodline. All I needed was time. And time was something they gave me when they showed me the door. The day they fired me, they thought they'd ended my story. But what they didn't know was that I had just begun chapter 1. They celebrated like I was never coming back, as if they had torn out a chapter, and the story was over. But I was never a chapter. I was the author. And I had just found a pen sharper than their knives. For the first time in my life, I was invisible. And strangely, that was power. No more legacy weighing on my shoulders. No more expectations to smile at shareholders while bleeding internally. No more playing nice in boardrooms where every handshake came with a dagger. I didn't vanish. I descended into the underbelly of business, where real moves are made in silence, not through press conferences. Singapore. I rented a room above a ramen shop in Geelong. The air smelled like soy and steel. It was humid, chaotic, unforgiving, just like the world I planned to rise in. Every morning, I took cold showers, not by choice. The water heater was broken, but it woke me up in ways comfort never could. At night, I mapped every contact I had ever made in the business world. Lawyers, analysts, a few disgraced CFOs with clean hands and dirty minds. And by week 3, I had something more dangerous than a revenge plan. I had a blueprint. OMX wasn't born in a moment. It was built in layers, like armor. At first, I named it something meaningless, a random LLC tucked under a holding firm. I didn't need recognition. I needed reach. While Maddox Corp clung to old contracts and nepotistic deals, I studied emerging markets, drone logistics, AI route optimization, decentralized freight networks. They were playing Monopoly. I was building the next Amazon. The first investor was an old rival of my father's. He once lost a board seat because of him. Now he gave me $4 million with no questions, only a smile and a glass of whiskey. Make him regret it, he said. Not by failing, by becoming what he never imagined. And so I did. I flew to Seoul, then Berlin, then Dubai. Each city added another brick to the empire. No press, no LinkedIn posts, no hint of my face. Just contracts, cold numbers, and teams of the best minds who didn't know my last name, only my standards. I paid well, I listened better, and I built something that didn't need a throne. It had engines, and it moved. OMX launched publicly 2 years later. We didn't make noise, we made results. Companies switched to our logistics within months, faster shipping, lower costs, real-time tracking powered by machine learning. We grew 40% in 6 months, but I wasn't chasing growth. I was chasing a shadow, a building, Maddox Tower, my family's glass monument. I didn't want to burn it. I wanted them to offer it to me, on their knees. Meanwhile, Maddox Corp began to rot from the inside. Evan, my ever-arrogant half-brother, took over with the subtlety of a wrecking ball. Flashy deals, inflated numbers, hiring friends of friends who couldn't read balance sheets without coloring them, and of course more offshore consultants. The press started asking questions. Stock price dipped. Old investors began to back out, one by one. Still, they never called me, which was perfect, because while they were busy surviving, I was preparing to dominate. The moment everything turned, a government contract, $90 million, the bidding came down to 2 names, Maddox Corp and OMX. They never imagined we were a threat. Hell, they didn't even know I was OMX. But when the news broke, Maddox Corp loses federal logistics contract to little-known OMX Corp, I could feel the cracks forming. I read the article in silence, then smiled, and whispered, now they'll start watching, but they're already too late. I moved OMX headquarters to Manhattan, right across from Maddox Tower, not out of spite, out of strategy. They needed to see it, every day, a building rising faster, brighter, stronger. One night, I stood on the rooftop of our new office, glass in hand, the city screaming below, and across the street Maddox Tower, lights dimmed, like a monument mourning its own decay. I remembered the day I was fired, the chair I once sat in, the smug look on Evan's face, my father's cold detachment, and for the first time in a long time I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused, because now I didn't want revenge. I wanted dominance. I didn't need to destroy them. I just needed to rise so high they had to look up to beg for a second chance. And homie, that moment was coming. Soon. I didn't expect the email. Not from him. Not after everything. But there it was, subject line cold. Clinical seeking strategic leadership role. Available immediately. Sent to HR at OMX Corp. IO. No special attention. Just another file in the digital stack. If I hadn't scanned our applicant database personally that night, I might have missed it. But fate has a way of circling back. Because the name on the resume, the one buried halfway down the pile, was Thomas Maddox. my father. The man who built an empire by cutting off everyone who didn't kneel. Now he was begging for a seat at my table. At first, I thought it was a prank, a bot, or some sick joke. But no, it was him. Same signature, same polished grammar, same arrogance thinly veiled beneath desperation. He listed his previous CEO experience as a badge of honor, yet glossed over the fact that under his leadership, Maddox Corp had lost nearly 38% of its valuation. He didn't mention Evan, didn't mention the investigation, didn't mention me, just a bland line that said departed to pursue new opportunities. Oh, how history repeats itself. I could have ignored it, forwarded it to HR, let them handle it, politely decline, but something inside me shifted, not out of revenge, out of curiosity. What does a man look like after everything he's built slips through his fingers? What does powerlessness feel like on the tongue of a man who once told me, "You'll always need me more than I need you"? I scheduled the interview, myself, under a different name. No camera, no voice, just a text-based interview chat on our internal platform. He entered the digital room on time, 7:30 a.m. sharp. Some habits never die. "Good morning," he typed. "Thank you for the opportunity." I stared at the blinking cursor, then typed back, "What made you apply to OMX Corp?" A pause, longer than expected. Then it's a rising force. Discreet, but powerful. I admire that. Funny. He never admired me when I was discreet, only when I was obedient. I typed again, "You ran your last company for 27 years. Why leave now?" He hesitated. Internal politics, shifting values. The culture changed. It was time. I almost laughed out loud. Time. He made the culture. He twisted it around his image, and when it turned toxic, he lit the match and walked away. Then I asked the real question. Would you work under a female CEO? 10 seconds passed, then 20. I imagined him in some Manhattan apartment, gripping his coffee, jaw clenched. Then came the answer: I would work for vision. Not gender, clever man, still a snake. But snakes forget one thing: some people build fireproof boots. I ended the chat with a simple message: "Thank you for your time. We'll be in touch." He replied, "I look forward to it." But I didn't smile. Not yet. Because 20 minutes later, a second application came through. This one from Evan. No resume, just a portfolio link. Mostly fluff, bragging about deals he didn't close, awards he didn't earn, strategies he likely stole from analysts who now work for me. His cover letter was worse. I believe OMX could benefit from my experience navigating family-led organizations. Family-led. Interesting choice of words for someone who nearly destroyed one. I didn't respond to Evan's application, not right away. Instead, I invited both of them, father and son, to a private, in-person executive screening event at our Midtown office. They didn't know I'd be there. They didn't know I'd be watching. And they didn't know. The walls were made of two-way mirrors, just like the boardroom where they fired me. The day of the interview arrived. My team prepped the room, brushed chrome, minimalist lighting, every camera positioned precisely. I stood behind the mirror in a sleek black suit, hair pulled back, expression unreadable. Thomas entered first. He looked older, shoulders slightly hunched, tie too tight. That corporate scent of a man trying too hard to be relevant. Evan followed minutes later on his phone, arrogant as ever, like he still thought the room belonged to him. They sat across from two junior execs I'd briefed beforehand, polite but firm. The questions started simple. They answered with polish, buzzwords, empty charm. But then came the curveballs. Tell me about a time you were on the wrong side of a decision and what you learned. My father's face tightened. Evan chuckled nervously. Neither answered directly. Then came my favorite. If you had the chance to work under a former employee, one you dismissed, how would you handle it? Silence. Then my father cleared his throat and said I'd admit my mistake. If it helped the company, I'd serve wherever I was needed. He thought that was humility, but I knew better. It was survival instinct. After they left, I sat in the empty interview room alone. The seat they had warmed still carried the scent of legacy, but it no longer made me tremble. I remembered the day I stood here on the other side as a girl they thought would never survive outside their system. Now they were asking to be let into mine. That night, I didn't sleep. I replayed the footage, slowed down every frame, the fidget in Evan's hands, the regret behind my father's eyes. I didn't feel joy or triumph. What I felt, though, was control. The kind of control you only get when you've been powerless. The kind that doesn't scream. It whispers. And it commands. I drafted 2 letters. The first rejection for Evan. Politely phrased. Professionally distant. No emotion. Just a final line: Maddox Corp is pursuing candidates more aligned with our values. The second, an invitation for Thomas. But not as an executive, not as a leader. As a consultant. Temporary. Conditional. Reporting to a boardroom with glass walls and no nameplates. A place where he would sit in silence and watch the company his daughter built without him. I clicked send, then I leaned back, closed my eyes. And for the first time since that terrible day, I smiled. Not because I'd won, but because they didn't even realize. The game had changed. Power doesn't come with applause. It arrives in silence. In rooms where they whisper your name but can't say it out loud because it tastes like shame. And on the day they walked back into my orbit, the same orbit they exiled me from, they didn't walk in as family. They walked in as subjects. The Maddox name still held weight in certain circles. But in my world, it was a liability. The moment my father stepped into the OMX executive suite as a strategic consultant, he became an artifact, a living relic from a time when men like him ruled through intimidation, inheritance, and silent erasure. But I wasn't here to humiliate him. I was here to let the past sit in the back row and watch. He came in early, always early, like it would somehow earn him back respect. He brought printed reports, wore 3-piece suits, and called every intern young man or young lady like we were in 1985. I let him have it. The illusion, the dignity, but not the power. Never again. OMX didn't need his insight. We had algorithms for that. What we needed was the image of Maddox working under the company he once disowned his daughter from. PR loved it. The press spun it as Olivia Maddox rebuilds bridges. They called me gracious. But they didn't know. This wasn't grace. This was choreography. A redemption arc he never earned and I never promised. He asked for a one-on-one meeting 2 weeks in, requested it formally via email. Subject line, seeking clarification on role scope. I scheduled it at 6:00 p.m. sharp, after hours, no assistants, just us. Like ghosts finally meeting in the ruins. He entered quietly, closed the door himself, stood there for a moment, like the walls might swallow him. Then he sat, not across the desk, to the side, lower, unarmed. Olivia, he began. I owe you. I held up a hand. Not out of disrespect, out of precision. This isn't a reconciliation, I said, voice flat, tone colder than glass. This is a hierarchy. You're here because I allow it. He blinked, swallowed. I leaned forward. You gave me nothing. You took everything. And I rebuilt it without your name, your money, your approval. He didn't speak, didn't flinch. Maybe he thought I'd soften. Maybe he hoped for a flicker of forgiveness. But I didn't come here to heal like I came to reclaim. I stood up, walked to the window, looked down at the city he used to rule. Tell me, I asked, what's it like to walk into a company and not be feared, not be bowed to, just tolerated? He exhaled, long, low, like something broke inside him. It's humbling. I turned around. It's justice. He didn't fight, didn't raise his voice, just nodded. You always were better than me, he said. But I didn't answer because I didn't need his validation. Not anymore. He left 5 minutes later, no handshake, no hug, no I'm proud of you. Just a man walking out of a room he never thought he'd sit beneath. The next morning, Evan called, blocked number. I let it ring 5 times before answering. His voice cracked the second word in, live. I let the silence stretch. Then came the confession. He'd been blacklisted. Major firms didn't trust him. The SEC was reopening a file. He needed help, needed someone to vouch. He didn't say please, didn't say sorry, just a string of excuses wrapped in panic. I listened, every second of it, then asked one question: why should I help you? Another pause. Then, because we're blood. And there it was. The same rope he once used to strangle my future now held out like a lifeline. But I wasn't drowning. He was. I didn't hang up. I didn't scream. I simply replied, "Blood isn't loyalty. Blood is biology. You chose betrayal. Now I choose silence." And I ended the call. That same week, I received an invitation. A gala, hosted by Maddox Corp, desperate for investors, trying to prove they were still relevant. Theme: legacy in motion. The irony nearly made me laugh. But instead of declining, I RSVP'd yes. Because some endings deserve an audience. The night of the gala, I wore black velvet, sleek, silent, unapologetic. My heels echoed through their marble lobby, the same sound that once announced my exile. Now it signaled my return. I didn't make a scene, didn't take the mic, didn't toast. I simply existed and let them witness. Because sometimes, you don't need revenge. You just need to let them see what they lost standing tall, untouched, unbothered. Evan was there, so was my father, but neither approached me, and that was the real twist. They no longer had the right to speak my name. I left before dessert. No goodbyes, no glances back, just one final look at the building once promised to me, now crumbling under its own false legacy. And as I stepped into the car, I whispered I didn't burn the empire. I replaced it. Power isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with fists. It walks in quiet. Sits down like it belongs and lets everyone else squirm. That's what I learned the moment I realized I didn't need revenge. I needed a throne they couldn't reach. Not because they weren't worthy, but because the throne didn't exist until I built it. 6 months after the gala, Maddox Corp folded. The final blow wasn't public. It came from within, a quiet mass exit of shareholders after OMX acquired their largest freight contract in Latin America. No threats, no lawsuits, just numbers that no longer made sense. Their last quarterly earnings report read like a tombstone. I didn't gloat, didn't send flowers, didn't even return the voicemail my father left that morning. I had nothing left to say. Because this wasn't a victory. This was closure. The media ran headlines for weeks. OMX claims market crown. Maddox Corp legacy crumbles. Daughter outsmarts dynasty. But I stayed silent. Let them talk. Let them write stories about the woman who rose from ashes. Because none of them knew I was the fire. I called a global press conference weeks later, not to address the collapse of Maddox Corp, but to announce something far more dangerous. A merger, OMX and a tech forward, female-founded AI platform for real-time shipping analysis. Name of the new entity, Nomad Global, a name with no roots, no ties, no blood, just velocity, vision, and a future no one could trace back to the family that tried to erase me. I stood at the podium in a white suit, not symbolic, not performative, just a statement that I had nothing to hide and nothing left to prove. Reporters threw questions like darts. What do you say to those who think this is vengeance? Will your father be part of Nomad? Did you plan this since you left Maddox Corp? I looked them all in the eye and said, "This isn't revenge, this is evolution, and no, Thomas Maddox will not be joining us. Some legacies belong in museums, not boardrooms." The clip went viral, not because I raised my voice, but because I didn't blink, because I didn't flinch when history tried to call my name. 2 weeks later, I received a letter, handwritten, blue ink, no return address, but I knew the handwriting. My father's, Olivia. "This will be the last time I reach out. You've built something remarkable, something I never had the courage to imagine. I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope one day you'll understand I was scared. Scared of your strength, scared of becoming obsolete. You didn't ruin the family. You outgrew it. T. I read it once. Then I burned it. Not in rage, but in ritual. Some ghosts don't need to haunt. They just need to be released." As for Evan, last I heard, he moved to Bali, started a podcast about self-reinvention. He calls himself a thought leader now. I let him have that. Because some men would rather drown in delusion than live with truth. And his truth is that the sister he once laughed out of a boardroom now signs the checks that fund the world he can't afford to live in. OMX Now Nomad went public that fall, highest IPO in our industry's history. I rang the bell at Nasdaq, alone, not because no one supported me, but because I needed the world to see me without shadows, without a father behind me, without a brother beside me, without a name borrowed from someone else's legacy. I stood on that platform as Olivia, just Olivia, and the moment the bell rang, I whispered under my breath, this was never about revenge. It was about becoming someone they couldn't erase. Later that evening, I returned to the rooftop of our first OMX office. Same city, same skyline, but everything had changed. Below me, lights flickered, lives moved. Deals were made in buildings I now owned. I looked across the city to the shell of Maddox Tower. Lights out, lobby shuttered, the nameplate removed. I imagined my father standing there, once a king, now a man staring at the monument of his own obsolescence. And I didn't feel hate. I felt peace. Because forgiveness, I've learned, isn't always a gift you give to others. Sometimes, it's the silence you give to yourself. I don't attend family functions anymore, not because I'm bitter, but because I'm free. Free from performative loyalty, from inherited expectations, from a version of myself built by someone else's blueprint. I no longer sit at tables to prove I belong. I build my own tables. And if I'm the only one there, so be it. Because I was never meant to inherit the crown. I was meant to forge it. Melt down the gold they tried to hang around my neck like a leash and wear it as armor. They fired me from their company, but they could never fire me from my own destiny. And in the end, they didn't lose a daughter. They lost the future.